The entire restaurant went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Marcus Sterling, a man worth $30 billion, sat back in his velvet chair with a cruel smirk on his face. He had just placed a stack of 100 crisp $100 bills on the table, $10,000. He looked at Helen, the trembling waitress, and asked her a question so twisted, so morally bankrupt, that the other diners gasped in horror. He thought he had her trapped. He thought poverty had made her weak. But Marcus Sterling made a fatal calculation that night. He didn't know who Helen really was, or the secret she was hiding beneath that cheap uniform. And when she finally opened her mouth to answer, she didn't just refuse him. She destroyed him. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It punished. It hammered against the stained glass windows of the Gilded Cage, the city's most exclusive, reservations-only dining establishment. Inside, however, the storm didn't exist. Inside, the air smelled of white truffle, aged cognac, and old money. Helen Vance adjusted her apron in the back service corridor, wincing as a sharp pain shot up her left calf. She had been on her feet for 10 hours straight. Her shoes, bought second-hand from a thrift store, had worn-out soles that offered zero support against the hard tile floors. She took a deep breath, checking her reflection in the stainless steel of the industrial fridge. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, tight bun, mandated by management. Her eyes, usually a vibrant green, were dull with exhaustion. She looked at her reflection and whispered her nightly mantra. Rent. Medicine. Mom. Just get through the shift. Helen wasn't always a waitress. 3 years ago, she had been finishing her master's degree in behavioral psychology, top of her class, with a bright future ahead. Then, the crash happened. Not the stock market. The car crash. A drunk driver had T-boned her mother's sedan. The driver had good lawyers. Helen's mother had life-altering spinal injuries and insurance that denied every major claim. The legal fees and medical bills had incinerated Helen's savings, her degree plans, and her future. Now, she was 26, drowning in debt and serving filet mignon to people who spent more on wine in one night than she earned in a year. Vance! The sharp hiss of the floor manager, Mr. Henderson, snapped her out of her thoughts. Henderson was a small man with a large ego and a nervous, sweating problem. Table 4 is arriving. VIP. High priority. Do not, I repeat, do not mess this up. If I see an empty water glass for more than 5 seconds, you're out. Understand? Helen nodded, smoothing her skirt. Who is it, Mr. Henderson? Henderson wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Marcus Sterling. Helen felt a cold pit form in her stomach. Everyone knew Marcus Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Tech, a software mogul known less for his innovation and more for his ruthlessness. He was the kind of billionaire who bought companies just to fire the employees and sell the assets. The tabloids called him the Silicon Reaper. He was also famous for his tests, cruel little games he played with service staff to see if they were worthy of his tip. I'll handle it, Helen said, though her hands were shaking slightly. You better, Henderson warned. He's bringing an entourage. They're celebrating his acquisition of the waterfront housing project. He's in a mood. Helen pushed through the double doors into the dining room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The soft jazz, the clinking of silver on porcelain, the low murmur of gossip. It was a world she stood on the edge of, but could never enter. She made her way to table 4, the prime spot in the center of the room, under the crystal chandelier. As she approached, the doors to the restaurant swung open. The host didn't just greet the guests, he practically bowed. Marcus Sterling walked in like he owned the oxygen in the room. He was handsome in a predatory way, sharp jawline, tailored Italian suit that cost more than Helen's mother's medical treatments for a year, and eyes that were dark, cold, and scanning the room for weakness. Flanking him were two younger men, his yes men, junior executives named Brad and Chad, who laughed too loud at things that weren't funny. On his arm was a woman who looked bored, scrolling on her phone, clearly there for the photo op. They sat down, bringing a chaotic energy to the serene restaurant. Marcus didn't even look at the menu. He snapped his fingers without looking up. Service. Helen stepped forward, forcing a polite smile onto her face. Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Welcome to the Gilded Cage. My name is Helen, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Marcus slowly looked up from his phone. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her shoes, then her cheap watch, then, finally, her eyes. He smirked, a look of pure condescension. Helen, he said, testing the name like it was a bad wine. You look tired, Helen. Rough night, or just a rough life? Brad and Chad snickered. Helen kept her back straight. Just focused on providing excellent service, sir. Can I start you with some drinks? I'll have the 82 Chateau Margaux, Marcus said loudly, ensuring the tables nearby could hear. And bring 4 glasses, but check the bottle for corkage. I don't want vinegar. Excellent choice, sir. As Helen turned to leave, Marcus spoke again, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. And Helen, be quick. I hate waiting. Time is money, and frankly, my time is worth more than your entire existence. Helen froze for a microsecond, the insult stinging like a slap. But she swallowed her pride. She had to. Her mother needed the medicine. Right away, sir, she whispered, and walked away, feeling his eyes burning into her back like a laser sight. The game had begun. The next hour was a masterclass in humiliation. Marcus Sterling wasn't just a difficult customer. He was a sadist. When Helen poured the wine, he claimed she poured it too aggressively and demanded she decant it again. When the appetizers arrived, rare scallops with caviar, he sent them back because the temperature was off by 2 degrees, a biological impossibility for him to detect. Every time Helen returned to the table, Marcus had a new complaint, a new sneer. He made her fetch items they didn't even carry, forcing her to run to the back and apologize, only for him to laugh when she returned empty-handed. It's about dominance, boys, Marcus lectured his table, ignoring Helen as she cleared the plates. The world is divided into wolves and sheep. The sheep exist to be shorn. Look at her. He gestured to Helen with a fork. She accepts the abuse because she needs the scraps. It's pathetic, really. The woman next to him looked uncomfortable. Marcus, stop it. She's just doing her job. She's not doing a job, Vanessa. She's serving, Marcus retorted. There's a difference. By the time the main course was cleared, Helen was physically trembling. Her legs were screaming in pain, but her spirit was taking the heavier beating. She had been insulted, run ragged, and treated like furniture. She retreated to the kitchen, leaning against the counter, trying to hold back tears. He's a monster, she whispered to the sous chef, Marco. He's a whale, Marco replied, chopping onions aggressively. His bill is already at $5,000. The tip will be huge. Just survive, Helen. Think of the money. The money? That was the only thing keeping her here. If he tipped the standard 20%, she could pay off the overdue notice on her mum's physical therapy bills. She composed herself, splashed cold water on her face, and went back out to offer the dessert menu. When she arrived at table 4, the dynamic had changed. The plates were cleared. The wine was finished. Marcus was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes gleaming with a dark intensity. The laughter from Brad and Chad had stopped. They were watching him with anticipation. Helen, Marcus said, his voice surprisingly soft. Come closer. Helen stepped up to the table, keeping a respectful distance. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Would you like to see the dessert menu? No dessert, Marcus said. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a thick envelope. He opened it and pulled out a stack of bills, $100 bills, fresh, bound in a bank wrapper. He slapped the stack onto the white tablecloth. The sound echoed in the quiet restaurant. Heads from nearby tables turned. $10,000, Marcus announced. Helen stared at the money. It was more than she made in 4 months. It was enough to fix everything for a while. I don't understand, sir, Helen said, her voice barely a whisper. Is there something wrong with the bill? The bill is fine, Marcus smiled, showing too many teeth. This isn't for the food. This is a tip. A very, very generous tip. Helen's heart leapt. Was he actually apologizing? Was this some eccentric, billionaire way of making up for the bad behavior? Thank you, sir. She reached out tentatively. That is incredibly generous. Marcus snatched the money back, holding it just out of her reach. I didn't say it was yours yet. He stood up. The restaurant had gone quiet. People sensed a scene was unfolding. Mr. Henderson was watching from the corner, looking terrified, but unwilling to intervene with his biggest client. In my company, Helen, Marcus projected his voice, performing for the audience. We believe in performance bonuses. We believe that money is earned through exceptional acts. He walked around the table and stood next to her. He was tall, looming over her. He smelled of expensive cologne and cruelty. I am willing to give you this $10,000, tax-free, right now, Marcus said, holding the cash in front of her face. But you have to do one simple thing for me. Helen felt a trap closing around her. What is it? Marcus pointed a manicured finger toward the front of the restaurant. Through the large bay windows, you could see the rainy street outside. Standing under the awning of the building across the street was an old man. He was homeless, huddled in a ragged army jacket, shivering as he tried to sell damp newspapers to passers-by who ignored him. You see that piece of trash outside? Marcus asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. That old beggar? He's ruining my view. He's an eyesore. Helen looked at the man. She knew him. His name was Arthur. He was a Vietnam veteran who had lost his mind to PTSD and his home to the banking crisis. Sometimes on her breaks, Helen gave him hot soup from the kitchen. I see him, Helen said, her voice hardening. Marcus grinned. He picked up a silver pitcher from the table. It was filled with ice water. Here is the deal, Helen. I want you to take this pitcher of ice water. I want you to walk outside, and I want you to dump it right over that bum's head while he sleeps. The restaurant gasped. A woman at table 6 covered her mouth. Wake him up, Marcus continued, his eyes dancing with malice. Tell him he's garbage and he needs to get off my street. Do that, and this $10,000 is yours. Helen looked from the pitcher of water to the stack of cash, and then to Marcus's face. You want me to assault a homeless man for money? She asked, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with a rising, volcanic anger. It's just water, Helen. He's already wet from the rain. Marcus laughed. I'm offering you a lifeline. 10 grand. Think of what you could do with that. New shoes, a better apartment, maybe fix whatever tragedy is waiting for you at home. He leaned in, close to her ear. Everyone has a price, Helen. I'm just trying to find yours. So, are you a wolf or are you a sheep? The silence in the room was suffocating. All eyes were on Helen. The manager, Henderson, was making cut-it-out motions, but Marcus ignored him. The billionaire held the cash out, waving it like a treat for a dog. "Tick-tock, Helen," Marcus whispered. "The offer expires in 60 seconds. The restaurant was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the wine fridges in the back. Every eye was fixed on Helen. The wealthy patrons of the Gilded Cage had stopped eating. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. They were witnessing a live moral experiment, a gladiatorial game where a young woman's dignity was fighting against her desperation. Helen looked at the silver pitcher. Condensation beaded on the outside. It was freezing to the touch. She looked at the stack of money. $10,000. Mum's surgery copay is $3,000, a voice in her head whispered. The rent is 2 months behind. The car needs a new transmission. If she threw the water, Arthur would be cold and wet for a night. That was it. He was tough. He'd survived Da Nang. He'd survived winters worse than this. Just a splash of water. And she could save her mother's life. It was a utilitarian calculation. 1 moment of cruelty for a lifetime of relief. Marcus saw the hesitation in her eyes. He leaned back, confident. He knew that look. It was the look of a soul being sold. "Smart girl," Marcus purred. "Go on, earn it." Helen's hand closed around the handle of the pitcher. The metal was biting cold. She lifted it. It was heavy, sloshing with ice and water. "I'll be right back," Helen said. Her voice was hollow, void of emotion. She turned her back on table 4. She began the long walk toward the front entrance. Every step felt like she was walking through molasses. She passed table 2, the senator's wife, who looked away in shame. She passed table 7, a young couple on a date, the man filming Helen with his phone, eager to catch the viral moment of the cruel waitress. Mr. Henderson, the manager, stood by the host stand. He looked pale. He opened his mouth to stop her, to tell her this violated every code of conduct. But he looked back at Marcus Sterling and clamped his mouth shut. He was a coward. He wouldn't save her. Helen reached the heavy oak doors. She pushed them open. The sound of the storm rushed in, a cacophony of wind, tires on wet pavement, and distant sirens. The temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly. Helen stepped out onto the sidewalk. The door swung shut behind her, muffling the restaurant noise, but leaving her visible through the large plate glass windows. The rain was coming down in sheets. Within seconds, Helen's uniform was soaked. Her thin blouse clung to her skin, and the cold wind bit through her bones. She walked to the edge of the awning. Arthur was there, curled into a ball on a piece of flattened cardboard. He was wrapped in a dirty olive-drab blanket that had seen better decades. He was asleep, his breathing rattling in his chest. A small empty coffee cup sat near his head, containing 3 pennies. Helen stood over him. She held the pitcher with both hands. The ice clinked against the silver. Inside the restaurant, noses were pressed against the glass. Marcus Sterling was standing now, swirling his wine, a twisted grin on his face. He was watching his puppet dance. Helen looked down at Arthur. She saw the scar on his cheek. She saw the trembling of his hands, even in sleep. She remembered the stories he had told her when she brought him soup. Stories about his daughter who died, about the noise of the helicopters that never left his head. She raised the pitcher. Inside, Marcus laughed. He raised his glass in a toast to the glass window. Helen tipped the pitcher. A stream of ice water poured out. But it didn't hit Arthur. Helen had rotated her wrists at the last second. She poured the water onto the concrete gutter 5 feet away from the sleeping man. The ice cubes clattered harmlessly onto the street, washing away into the storm drain. She emptied the entire pitcher until the last drop fell. Then, she did something that made the people inside the restaurant gasp. Helen knelt down on the wet pavement. The knees of her stockings tore, but she didn't care. She reached out and gently touched Arthur's shoulder. The old man jerked awake, eyes wide with panic. Charlie, they're in the trees, he shouted, thrashing. It's okay, Arthur, Helen said, her voice soft but firm over the wind. It's me, it's Helen. Arthur blinked, his eyes focusing. He saw the waitress, soaked to the bone, kneeling in the rain next to him. Helen! Miss Helen! What are you doing? You'll catch your death. Helen didn't answer. She reached into her apron pocket. She didn't have money. She didn't have food. But she had something else. She pulled out a small sealed packet of hand warmers she kept for her own hands on freezing nights. She cracked them to activate the heat and pressed them into Arthur's freezing palms. Keep these tight, she said. I'm going to bring you something hot in a few minutes. Don't go anywhere. You're a good angel, Miss Helen, Arthur mumbled, clutching the warm packets to his chest. God bless you. Helen stood up. She took the empty silver pitcher. She wiped the rain from her eyes. She turned back toward the restaurant. Through the glass, she locked eyes with Marcus Sterling. His smile was gone. His face was a mask of fury. He hadn't gotten his show. He hadn't broken the sheep. Helen pushed the doors open and walked back into the warmth of the gilded cage. She was dripping wet. Her hair was plastered to her skull. Her makeup was running. She looked like a wreck. But as she walked back toward table 4, her stride was different. The limp was gone. Her head was high. She wasn't walking like a waitress anymore. She was walking like a prosecutor entering a courtroom. The silence in the restaurant was now heavy, pregnant with anticipation. Helen marched straight up to Marcus Sterling. She didn't put the pitcher down gently. She slammed it onto the table with a resounding clang that made the wine glasses jump. Water from her clothes dripped onto the pristine tablecloth, staining it dark. Marcus stared at her, his eyes narrowing into slits. The vein in his temple throbbed. You failed, Marcus spat, his voice low and venomous. I told you to dump it on him. You missed. You get nothing. No money. And I'm going to make sure you lose this job before I leave tonight. Brad and Chad looked at their boss, then at Helen, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Helen stood her ground. She didn't flinch. She looked down at the billionaire, and for the first time all night, she was the one looking down. I didn't fail, Mr. Sterling, Helen said. Her voice was clear, projecting to the back of the room. I answered your question. I didn't ask a question, Marcus snapped, slamming his hand on the table. I gave an order. I asked you to decide if you were a wolf or a sheep. No, Helen interrupted him. You asked a trick question. You presented a false dichotomy. Marcus blinked. Excuse me? You think the world is divided into wolves and sheep, Helen continued, her voice gaining strength, fueled by her psychology training. You think there are only predators and prey, and you offered me money to prove I was a predator like you. But that's the trick, Marcus. That's the lie you tell yourself to sleep at night. She pointed a shaking finger at the window, toward Arthur. That man out there, he's not a sheep. He's a decorated Marine who pulled 3 men out of a burning transport vehicle in 1969. He has endured more pain in one pinky finger than you have in your entire life. He isn't weak. He's broken. There is a difference. She turned her gaze back to Marcus. Her eyes bored into him, dissecting him. And you? You're not a wolf, Mr. Sterling. The room gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Marcus's face turned a violent shade of red. You watch your mouth, you little... A wolf kills to survive. Helen steamrolled over him. A wolf protects its pack. You hurt people for entertainment. You dangle money over desperate people to watch them jump because it's the only way you can feel tall. That's not power, Marcus. That's pathology. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a hush that was somehow louder than shouting. I studied men like you for my master's thesis. Narcissistic personality disorder with sadistic tendencies. You don't torture waiters because you're strong. You do it because you're terrified. You're terrified that if you strip away the billions, the suits, and the fear you inspire, there is absolutely nothing underneath. You are empty. Marcus was frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He had been dressed down in boardrooms, screamed at by shareholders, but he had never been analyzed by a servant in front of an audience. Helen reached out and picked up the stack of $10,000. Marcus's hand twitched, as if to grab it back, but he didn't move. You said this money was for cleaning up the trash, Helen said, weighing the cash in her hand. She looked at the homeless man outside. Then she looked at Marcus Sterling. I agree, she said. Trash shouldn't be in a place like this. She tossed the stack of money back onto the table. It landed right in front of Marcus. But I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling, because money from a man like you is dirty. And unlike you, I can't be bought. I'm not a wolf. I'm not a sheep. I'm a human being. Something you clearly forgot how to be a long time ago. Helen took a deep breath. The adrenaline was shaking her body, but she felt lighter than she had in years. Now, she said, turning to her stunned manager, Mr. Henderson. I quit. She untied her apron, balled it up, and dropped it on the table right next to the untouched filet mignon. Enjoy your dinner, gentlemen, she said. She turned on her heel and began to walk away. For 3 seconds there was silence. Then a slow clapping started. It came from the back of the room. An older man in a grey suit was standing up. Then the woman at table 6 stood up. Then the couple at table 7. Suddenly, the restaurant erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous ovation. People were standing, cheering for the soaked waitress who had just slain the dragon. Marcus Sterling sat in his chair, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. He looked around the room, realizing for the first time that his money couldn't buy him out of this humiliation. He had lost the room. He had lost the game. But the story wasn't over. As Helen reached the kitchen doors, intending to grab her purse and leave via the back alley, a voice called out, "Wait, Miss Vance, please wait!" It wasn't Marcus. It was the older man who had started the clapping. He was walking toward her, leaning on a cane, moving with a distinct air of authority. He was dressed modestly, but his watch was a Patek Philippe, understated, but worth more than the building. Helen stopped, wiping a mixture of rain and tears from her face. I'm sorry, sir. I don't work here anymore. You'll have to ask someone else. I'm not looking for a waitress, the man said, stopping in front of her. He had kind eyes, but they were sharp. I'm looking for a psychologist. Helen frowned, confused. Excuse me? The man smiled, reaching into his pocket. My name is Tobias Roth. I assume you've heard of Roth Enterprises? Helen's breath hitched. Roth Enterprises was a global philanthropic conglomerate. They ran hospitals, research centers, and veteran support networks. Tobias Roth was a legend in the city, the anti-Marcus Sterling. Yes, of course, Helen stammered. I was sitting at table 9, Tobias said, gesturing with his cane. I saw everything. I saw how you handled the stress. I saw the compassion you showed that veteran outside. And I heard your analysis of Mr. Sterling. It was remarkably accurate. Tobias stepped closer, lowering his voice. My director of human resources just retired. I need someone who understands people. Someone who can spot character, who can't be bought, and who has a spine of steel. I've been interviewing candidates with Ivy League MBAs for months, and none of them impressed me half as much as you did in the last 5 minutes. He held out a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. I can't offer you $10,000 for dumping water on a man, Tobias smiled gently. But I can offer you a starting salary of $120,000 a year, full benefits, and a signing bonus that will cover whatever medical bills are worrying you. I saw the look in your eyes when you looked at that cash. I know a caregiver's worry when I see it. Helen stared at the card. The noise of the restaurant faded away. $120K a year. It was salvation. It was a miracle. Are you serious? She whispered. I never joke about talent, Miss Vance. Report to my office Monday at 9 a.m. Tobias turned to look at Marcus Sterling, who was now frantically signaling for his check, desperate to escape the glaring eyes of the other diners. And don't worry about him, Tobias said loud enough for Marcus to hear. Sterling Tech's stock is dependent on their public image. I imagine when the video that young man at table 7 took goes online, Mr. Sterling will have much bigger problems than a wet tablecloth. Helen looked at Tobias, then at the defeated Marcus Sterling, and finally at the business card in her hand. Thank you, she choked out. Thank you. She pushed through the kitchen doors, her heart soaring. She had walked through the fire, and she had come out the other side, not just with her dignity, but with a future. But as she gathered her things in the locker room, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you won? This isn't over. Nobody humiliates me. Watch your back, Helen. Helen stared at the screen, the joy draining from her face. Marcus Sterling wasn't just a bully. He was a predator, and she had just wounded him. She wasn't out of the woods yet. The game had just moved to a much more dangerous level. Monday morning arrived with a surreal brightness. For the first time in 3 years, Helen didn't wake up with the crushing weight of dread on her chest. She woke up with purpose. She dressed in her only professional blazer, a charcoal grey piece she had saved from her grad school days. She looked in the mirror. The tired waitress was gone. In her place was Helen Vance, executive assistant to the CEO of Roth Enterprises. The video of the confrontation at the Gilded Cage had gone nuclear over the weekend. Someone had titled it, "Waitress Destroys Billionaire Bully," and it had amassed 12 million views in 48 hours. The comments were a flood of support. She is a queen. I used to work for Sterling Tech. Can confirm he is a nightmare. Does anyone know if she has a GoFundMe? Helen tried to ignore the fame. She knew the internet had a short memory. Today was about the real world. Roth Enterprises was located in a glass monolith in the center of the financial district. The lobby was quiet, efficient, and smelled of jasmine. When Helen swiped her new badge at the turnstile, a little green light beeped. Access granted. It felt like she was being let back into society. Tobias Roth was waiting for her in a corner office that overlooked the harbor. He didn't treat her like a charity case. He treated her like a prodigy. We have a lot of work to do, Helen, Tobias said, handing her a tablet. We are launching a new initiative for veteran housing next month. Given your interaction with Arthur on Friday, I want you to lead the community outreach. You have the empathy we've been missing. Helen spent the morning in a daze of productivity. She was good at this. She was analyzing demographics, coordinating with shelters, and using her psychology background to predict community pushback. For the first time, her brain was being used, not just her feet. At lunch, she sat in the break room, looking at her bank account on her phone. The signing bonus had hit. Her account, usually in the red, now had 5 figures. She had already transferred the money for her mother's surgery. Her mum was crying on the phone an hour ago. It was perfect. It was too perfect. At 2:00 p.m., the bubble burst. Helen was at her desk organizing files when 2 men in suits walked off the elevator. They weren't corporate suits. They were cheap, ill-fitting suits. They had badges on their belts. Detectives. They walked straight to the receptionist, showed a warrant, and pointed at Helen. Helen's heart hammered against her ribs. Tobias stepped out of his office, his brow furrowed. "Gentlemen, can I help you?" "Tobias Roth?" one detective asked. "We're here for your employee, Helen Vance." Helen stood up, her legs shaking. "Me? Why?" The detective walked over to her desk. He didn't smile. "Helen Vance, you are under arrest." "Arrest?" Helen gasped. The office went silent. "For what?" "Grand larceny," the detective said, pulling out handcuffs. "Mr. Marcus Sterling has filed a police report. He claims that on Friday night, after creating a distraction by arguing with him, you stole $10,000 in cash from his table. He has sworn affidavits from 2 witnesses stating they saw you pocket the money before leaving the restaurant." "That's a lie," Helen screamed as the cold metal cuffed her wrists. "I threw it back at him. Everyone saw it." "The witnesses say otherwise," the detective said impassively. "And since there are no cameras in the private dining section of the Gilded Cage, it's his word against yours, and his witnesses." "Brad and Chad," Helen whispered, realizing the depth of the trap. Marcus had used his lackeys to perjure themselves. Tobias stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "This is ridiculous. I was there. She didn't take a dime." "Then you can give a statement to the district attorney, Mr. Roth," the detective said. "But right now, she's coming with us. 10 grand is a felony, Miss Vance. You're looking at 5 to 10 years. They dragged her out, paraded her through the office of her new job, humiliated her in front of the people she had just started to bond with. As they led her into the elevator, Helen saw Tobias on his phone, shouting at his legal team. But as the doors closed, panic set in. Marcus wasn't just trying to get her fired. He was trying to put her in a cage. He was the wolf, and he had just clamped his jaws around her throat. The holding cell smelled of bleach and despair. Helen sat on the metal bench, hugging her knees. She had been processed, fingerprinted, and had her mug shot taken, a picture that she knew Marcus would leak to the press by morning. Waitress who shamed Billionaire. Actually a thief. The headlines wrote themselves. He was rewriting the narrative. He was turning the hero into the villain. 3 hours later, the heavy door opened. A woman in a sharp navy suit walked in. She looked like a shark, but a friendly one. "Helen, I'm Sarah Jenkins. I'm the head of legal for Roth Enterprises. Tobias sent me." Helen exhaled, a sob escaping her throat. "I didn't do it, Sarah, I swear." "We know," Sarah said, sitting down and opening a briefcase. Tobias gave a statement. "But here's the problem. The police have the sworn statements of Marcus, Brad, Chad, and this is the worst part, Mr. Henderson, the manager." "Henderson?" Helen felt sick. Why would he lie? "Because Sterling Tech just bought the building the Gilded Cage is in," Sarah explained grimly. "Henderson was likely told to corroborate the story or lose his pension. They have a unified narrative. You threw the water, caused a scene, and in the chaos, swiped the stack of bills before storming out. They claimed they checked the table immediately after you left and the money was gone." "It's a frame-up," Helen said, feeling the walls closing in. "It is," Sarah agreed. "But in court, it's 4 witnesses against 1 defendant and 1 witness, Tobias. And the prosecution will paint Tobias as biased because he hired you. To a jury, it looks like a he said, she said, and Marcus has the best lawyers money can buy. They will drag your financial history. They'll show your debts. They'll show your mum's medical bills. They will build a motive. They will say you were desperate." Helen buried her face in her hands. "So I'm going to prison because I stood up to a bully? Not if we can find the hole in their story, Sarah said, tapping her pen on her legal pad. There was a third party, someone who wasn't inside the restaurant, but had a view of the table. Helen looked up. The window. Exactly, Sarah nodded. The viral video starts after you came back inside. It doesn't show the table during the transaction. But the homeless man, Arthur. You said he was right outside the window, 5 feet away? Yes, Helen said, her eyes widening. He was lying on the grate. The table was right next to the glass. He would have seen if I took the money, or if Marcus took it back. He's our star witness, Sarah said. If an impartial third-party witness testifies that the money was still on the table when you walked away, the case collapses. The DA won't prosecute. We have to find him, Helen said, standing up. I can post bail? Tobias already paid it, Sarah smiled. You're free to go pending the hearing. But Helen, Marcus knows about Arthur too. If Marcus is smart, and he is, he knows Arthur is a loose end. Helen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the jail air. We have to get to him first. An hour later, Helen was back on the street in front of the gilded cage. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was still damp. She was wearing a hoodie and jeans, trying to stay low profile. Sarah was in a car parked down the block, ready to provide legal cover if things got messy. Helen walked to the spot where Arthur usually slept. It was empty. Not just empty, it was sanitized. The cardboard was gone. The stains on the concrete had been power-washed. It looked like no one had ever lived there. Helen ran into the convenience store next door. She knew the clerk, a teenager named Ravi. Ravi, she called out. Where's Arthur? Ravi looked nervous. He glanced out the window. I don't know, Helen. Some guys came by on Saturday. Big guys, security types. They told Arthur he couldn't stay here anymore. Said it was private property now. Did they hurt him? Helen asked, gripping the counter. They put him in a van, Ravi whispered. They said they were taking him to a shelter. But Arthur was screaming. He didn't want to go. Helen's blood ran cold. Marcus had kidnapped a witness, or worse. Did you see the van? Helen asked. Did you get a plate? No, Ravi shook his head. But Arthur dropped something when they grabbed him. I picked it up. Ravi reached under the counter and pulled out a small, dirty object. It was a dog tag, old, rusted, hanging on a broken chain, and wrapped around it was the empty wrapper of the hand warmers Helen had given him that night. Helen took the dog tag. It read, Arthur Penhaligon, USMC, 429-68-11. He kept the wrapper, Helen whispered, tears stinging her eyes. He knew I tried to help. She ran out to the car. She jumped in the passenger seat. They took him, Helen told Sarah, her voice trembling with rage. Marcus's security team took him away in a van on Saturday. Sarah cursed softly. If they intimidated him, or paid him off to leave town, we're sunk. But if they are holding him somewhere against his will, that's kidnapping. That's a federal crime. That brings down the whole empire. How do we find him? Helen asked. He could be anywhere in Seattle. Sarah pulled out her laptop. Sterling Tech just acquired the waterfront housing project, right? That was what they were celebrating. Yeah. I'm looking at the blueprints for the acquisition, Sarah typed furiously. It's a massive complex of old warehouses scheduled for demolition next week. If I were a billionaire trying to stash a homeless veteran where no one would look, I'd put him in a building I own that's fenced off and about to be destroyed. She turned the screen to Helen. A map showed a desolate stretch of docks. Warehouse 4B, Sarah said. It has a private security contract attached to it. Sterling Private Security. Helen looked at the map. He's there. I can feel it. We can't just storm in, Sarah warned. It's trespassing. If we're wrong, Marcus sues us for harassment, and you go to jail anyway. We need proof he's inside before we call the cops." Helen looked at the dog tags in her hand. She remembered Arthur's eyes, the terror of the war he still lived in. He had survived the jungle. He wouldn't survive Marcus Sterling. "I'm going in," Helen said, her voice turning into steel. "I know that warehouse. My dad used to work the docks. There's a storm drain entrance on the north side. It bypasses the gates." "Helen, that's dangerous," Sarah said. "Marcus tried to ruin my life, Sarah. Now he's hurting an old man to cover his tracks. I'm not waiting for a warrant. I'm going to get the truth." Helen opened the car door. "Keep your phone on," Sarah said, realizing she couldn't stop her. "Stream it. If anything happens, I need it on the cloud instantly." Helen nodded. She pulled her hood up. She was done serving. It was time to hunt. The storm drain was a nightmare of freezing sludge and rusted rebar. Helen crawled on her hands and knees, the stench of oil and decay filling her nose. She held her phone in her chest pocket, the camera lens just peeking out, streaming live to a private cloud server Sarah was monitoring. 60 feet in, she found the access grate. She pushed it open with a groan of rusted metal and climbed up into Warehouse 4B. The space was cavernous, lit only by emergency lights that cast long, skeletal shadows. It was filled with decaying shipping crates and heavy machinery marked for demolition. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, creating a deafening industrial symphony. Helen moved silently, hiding behind a forklift. In the center of the warehouse, under a hanging work light, she saw a makeshift cage made of chain-link fencing. Inside, sitting on a wooden crate, was Arthur. He wasn't tied up, but he was terrified. He was rocking back and forth, muttering to himself, clutching the hand-warmer wrapper like a talisman. Standing outside the cage, looking bored, was Chad, one of Marcus's yes-men from the restaurant. He was scrolling on his phone, a security guard jacket suspiciously loose on his frame. Helen's heart pounded. It was real. Kidnapping. False imprisonment. She stepped out from behind the forklift, holding her phone steady. "Chad!" Her voice rang out in the echoing space. Chad jumped, nearly dropping his phone. He squinted into the dark. "Who's there? This is private property." Helen stepped into the light. "It's over, Chad. Let him go." Chad's eyes widened. "Helen, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in jail. And you're supposed to be an executive assistant, not a jailer," Helen said, walking closer to the cage. "Did Marcus promise you a promotion for this? Kidnapping a veteran?" "It's not kidnapping," a smooth, arrogant voice echoed from the shadows behind her. "It's protective custody." Helen turned. Marcus Sterling emerged from the darkness, wearing a pristine trench coat over his suit, holding a rolled-up umbrella like a cane. He looked entirely out of place in the filthy warehouse, like a diamond in a gutter. "You're persistent, Helen. I'll give you that," Marcus sneered, walking toward the cage. He tapped the chain-link fence with his umbrella, making Arthur flinch violently. "Most sheep just lay down and bleed when they're bitten." "Arthur isn't your property, Marcus," Helen said, her voice shaking with fury. "And neither is the truth. You framed me." Marcus laughed, a hollow sound that bounced off the metal walls. "Of course I framed you. Did you really think you could humiliate me in public and walk away? I control the narrative, Helen. I bought the building, I bought the witnesses, and soon I'll buy the judge. Who are they going to believe? A billionaire philanthropist, or a desperate waitress with a mountain of debt?" He leaned in close to her face. "You see, Helen, you were right about one thing at the restaurant. I am empty. But that emptiness is a hunger, and I feed it by crushing little ants like you who forget their place. You threw $10,000 back in my face? Fine. Now you're going to prison for stealing it. It's poetic. Helen didn't back down. She looked him straight in the eye. You missed something, Marcus. Oh? And what's that? Helen pulled her phone completely out of her pocket. The screen was glowing red. Live stream. 45,500 viewers. Marcus froze. He looked at the phone, then back at Helen. Sarah, did you get all that? Helen said to the phone. Sarah's voice came through the speaker, crystal clear and triumphant. Every word, the confession to the frame-up, the witness intimidation, the kidnapping. The police are 90 seconds out. The colour drained from Marcus's face. He looked at Chad, who was already backing away toward the exit. You wouldn't, Marcus stammered, the arrogance evaporating, replaced by pure terror. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, Helen said, stepping past him to the cage door. She undid the simple latch. You're a sad little man who just built his own prison. She opened the door and knelt in front of Arthur. Arthur? It's Helen. It's time to go home. Arthur looked up, his eyes clearing. He saw Helen, and then he saw the man in the trench coat trembling behind her. The trees are quiet now, Charlie, Arthur whispered, a small smile forming on his weathered face. Yeah, Arthur, Helen said softly, helping him stand. They're quiet. Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open. Blue and red lights flooded the dark space. A SWAT team swarmed in, weapons drawn. Police, get on the ground, now! Chad was tackled before he made it 10 feet. Marcus Sterling, the Silicon Wolf, the man worth $30 billion, didn't fight. He sank to his knees on the dirty concrete, putting his hands on his head, defeated not by money or power, but by the truth streaming through a cracked smartphone screen. As the police cuffed Marcus and read him his rights, Sarah ran in, flanked by paramedics for Arthur. She hugged Helen so hard she almost cracked a rib. You crazy, brilliant woman, Sarah cried. We got him. It's over. The DA is already drafting the charges. He's done. Helen watched as they led Marcus away. He looked back at her one last time, his eyes full of hatred, but also a new, unfamiliar emotion. Fear. Helen didn't feel triumphant. She just felt tired and clean. The next day, the headlines were different. Billionaire arrested for kidnapping and framing Waitress. The viral video of the warehouse confession had 50 million views by noon. Sterling Tech's stock plummeted 40% in an hour. Helen sat in her new office at Roth Enterprises. The sun was shining. Tobias walked in and placed a fresh cup of coffee on her desk. Arthur is settled into the VA hospital, Tobias said gently. He's safe. He asked for you. I'll visit him tonight, Helen smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. It tasted better than anything she had ever served at the Gilded Cage. You know, Tobias said, looking out the window at the city below. Marcus was right about one thing. The world is full of wolves. He turned and looked at Helen with immense respect. But he forgot that sometimes the sheep grow teeth. Helen looked at her reflection in the computer monitor. The exhausted waitress was gone forever. The woman looking back was strong, unbreakable, and finally, free. Helen's story proves that true power isn't about how much money you have in the bank. It's about the integrity you carry in your soul. Marcus Sterling thought everyone had a price, but he learned the hard way that some things, like dignity and truth, cannot be bought. Helen didn't just save herself, she saved Arthur, and she exposed a predator hiding in plain sight. What would you have done in Helen's shoes? Would you have taken the $10,000, or would you have stood your ground? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good can triumph over evil. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling drama. Thanks for watching.